Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this writing clinic workshop for today. Thank you for joining me. So my name is Kieran. I am one of your English support tutors here on the Manchester campus. So thanks for joining me today. And so what's going to happen is this is a 12 session course on writing skills and basically the foundations of writing, of academic writing especially. So over the course, the sessions will go into lots of different ideas and we'll build on what came before. So this is basically just the first step. And then over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at some more complicated stuff. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've got on the agenda for today. Okay. All right. So our session today is all going to be about sentence construction. Okay. So when you are doing your assignments, okay, when you're doing any kind of academic writing in general, you need to be making sure that you have a variety of different sentence constructions. So like it says on the screen here, simple sentences and then more complex sentences, compound sentences, and then other things like relative clauses, which we will come back to later on. So we kind of do this for two reasons. The first reason is to avoid any kind of repetition. Okay. The second reason is to show your variety of language and your sophistication of your language as well. Okay. So if we learn to do both of those things, then we'll get a much better score in our assignments and also in your career afterwards, I guess. Okay. So just remember, if you are ever looking for any of these resources from the grammar clinics or anything else produced by the English support department, you can find them on Moodle. Okay, so if you have a look in the English for academic purposes section and then go into, well, like you can see on the screen there in the NCG or just in that folder in general, you will find all of those resources. If you need any other extra resources, you will find them in that place as well. Okay, so let's have a look here on the screen. On the screen here, we have a paragraph. So what I suggest you do is very quickly read this paragraph here and think about a couple of things. Okay. Is it a good paragraph? Okay. Does it have a good variety of sentence structures? Okay. And thirdly, do you think you could write something like this? Okay. So maybe pause the video here, have a look at it in a bit more detail, and then answer those three questions. Is it a good paragraph? Does it have a wide variety of sentence structures? And do you think you could write something like this? Okay, so pause it now, and then we will check in a second what we think. All right. Okay. So I think that was enough time to maybe have a look at it there. Okay. So in answer to the questions, yes, it is a very good paragraph. And yes, it does have a wide variety of sentences, definitely. And if you can write something like this, well, hopefully you can. All right. And if not, by the end of this session, hopefully you will be able to in the future. Okay, so let's look at it in a bit more detail then. So we're going to have a look at simple sentences to begin with. Okay, so simple sentences are useful and are important for making your points extremely clear. Okay, so simple sentences only can contain one clause and they must have both a subject and a verb. And they are one single completed thought. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples. The iPhone has been incredibly successful, and Apple's strong marketing strategies and brand loyalty contributed significantly to its success. So even though that second sentence is extremely long, it is still only a simple sentence because it has a subject. I mean, it's quite a long subject, but still a subject, and then it has a verb. Okay. The first one again is quite simple. Yeah, the iPhone, that's the subject. The verb has been, and then you've got an adjective and an adverb and an adjective there. Okay, so that is an example of a simple sentence. Just one clause, one idea, a subject, and a verb. Okay, so these are usually quite easy to make, but the next thing we're going to have a look at is a bit more difficult. Okay, so the next thing we're looking at here are compound sentences. Okay, so a compound sentence is when it has two or more of those clauses that we've looked at. Okay. All right. And then what you're doing is those complete sentences can stand alone, but we're actually connecting them together into one sentence. Okay. And normally they are connected by something called a coordinating conjunction. Now, don't worry about that word too much. It is just a special word that we use to connect two sentences or two clauses together. Okay, so we've got the iPhone is extremely popular. That's a simple sentence on its own. It has revolutionized the smartphone market. That is a sentence on its own. So we've got two sentences on their own, and we've connected them together using the word and. So it might seem very easy to do that, but this is actually quite a difficult activity to do. Take one sentence, another, put them together using the word and. So the things that are needed in a compound sentence, we need to have sentences that work on their own and they have a subject and a verb. Okay. You then need to have a coordinating conjunction. So that is one of those words like and, which we've just looked at. So it can be for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So the best way to kind of remember those words is using the acronym, which is FANBOYS, FANBOY, and then S. Okay, so if you use one of those words in between the two sentences, that is a good way to connect them together. But what do those words actually mean, and what kind of function do they have? Okay, so if you use for to connect two sentences, this gives you the meaning of because. Yeah, it gives you a reason why you do something. All right. So in the example, the iPhone has a sleek design, but Apple focuses on aesthetics. You could just change for because there, and it would have the same meaning. Okay. All right. So it's a nice alternative for you to use instead of using because. Okay. Now the next one you will definitely know. Okay. You use and when you want to give additional information. So Apple released the first iPhone in 2007. You want to give more information, and it quickly became a bestseller. Easy peasy. Okay, now the next one we have here is nor. Okay, so nor is like or, but it is when both of the things are negative. Okay, the new software update didn't, so negative, fix the existing bugs, nor did it introduce any new features. So no new features. That's a negative as well. Okay. The next one we have is but. So I'm sure you already know this one as well, but shows a contrast. So it mixes a positive with a negative or a negative with a positive. So the iPhone is popular worldwide. There's our positive, but it faces strong competition from Android devices. Okay, so we've got a mixture of positive and negative there. Okay. So the next one we have here is or. So or is when you have a choice of two or more things. Okay. So do you want this or do you want this? You need to make a choice. So the example is you can choose an iPhone or you might opt for an Android device and you will need to choose between those two options. Okay. So on to the next one, we have yet, and yet shows the opposite of an idea. So The battery life of the iPhone has improved over the years. That is a positive thing. Yet some users still find it insufficient. That's a negative thing. Okay, so we've used yet to link those two together. Okay, now on to the last one we have here is so. So show gives us the result of an action. Okay, so many people prefer the iPhone, so they are willing to pay a premium price. Okay, so we've got the cause, they prefer the design, then we've got the result of that. They are willing to pay more. Okay, so if you can use these words in your assignments, etc., then you are going to be doing very well with your scores. Okay. All right. So as much as possible, practice using these words, not just in your assignments, in other parts of your life as well. Okay. Because they will be useful for other kind of professional situations afterwards. Okay. So we've had a look at simple sentences. We've looked at compound sentences. Now let's look at the last one, which is complex sentences. Okay, so complex sentences are, as you can imagine, complex. So this is a sentence that has two parts. It has a part of a sentence that makes sense on its own. So that is called an independent clause. If it doesn't have the second part, it still makes sense on its own. And then the other part is something called a dependent clause, which means it only makes sense when you connect it to the first part. Okay, if you have it on its own, it doesn't make any logical sense. Okay, and then you connect them together with something called a subordinating conjunction. So we're going to have a look at them. They are similar to the ones we've just looked at, but some of them are a bit different as well. So this is an example from the paragraph that we looked at earlier. The iPhone seamless integration with other Apple products has solidified its place in the market. Okay, so that sentence on its own has a clear, single idea. Okay, but the second part, competitors have emerged with similar offerings. Similar to what? That only makes sense when we connect it to the first part. So the green part is the independent clause, and the red part is the dependent clause because it depends on the other part of the sentence in order to make sense. The blue part, while, is a subordinating conjunction. Okay. And the interesting thing with this is the while can come in the middle of the sentence, or it can come at the start of the sentence, and it still has no difference in meaning. Okay, so like it says here, you can change the structure of the sentence, but it still makes sense. Okay. But if you have your dependent clause at the start of the sentence, like in the second example, you need to have a comma at the end of it. If the if the dependent clause comes at the end, you don't need any commas. Okay, so just have a look at the difference there when it's at the start. Okay, when it's at the start, we need the comma, but when it's at the end, we need nothing. Okay. All right, so now we know what the complex sentences are. Let's have a look at a bit more information at these subordinating conjunctions. All right, so they are on the screen for all of us to see now. Okay, so similar to the ones we saw before, but they have a different function. Okay, so the first one you should already know, because. Because gives a reason or a cause of something. So she stayed home. Why? Because she was feeling unwell. Okay. If, you've probably seen this one before, and if talks about a condition. Okay. So if it rains, we will postpone the outdoor event. So that means that there are two options. It could rain, and if it does, you will postpone it. And if it doesn't rain, something different will happen. So it's something with more than one possible choice. Okay. The next one, although, okay, so although again shows a contrast, so it mixes a positive and a negative together. Although it was late, Negative, he continued working. Positive. Okay. All right. While can also give us a contrast as well, a positive and a negative. While it was late, he continued working, or he continued working while it was late. But while can also talk about when two actions happen at the same time. Okay, so like in the example, she read a book while waiting for the bus. Okay, so she was reading a book at the same time as waiting for the bus. Okay, the next one, when talks about the specifies a time or a situation. So he will call you when he arrives at the office. So at the time he arrives at the office, that will be the time that he calls you. Okay. So the next one, since, can have two functions as well. Since can tell you the starting time that something happened, but it can also talk about a reason for doing something. So in the sentence, it says, since it was his birthday, we celebrated with a cake. So this is a reason. Like, why did you celebrate? It was his birthday. So again, it's similar to because. So you could even say, because it was his birthday, we celebrated with a cake. Okay. Until. So this is another one of those time phrases. It tells us the time up to which something happened. Okay. So she will stay here until her flight departs. So she will stay, she will stay, she will stay. She will stop staying at the time her flight departs. Okay. So on to the next two. You should already know these. Okay. So before talks now about an earlier period, and after talks about a later period. Okay. So as, again, similar to while, can talk about a simultaneous action, two things happening at the same time. So in the sentence, he smiled as he received the good news. So he's receiving the good news, he's smiling at the same time. But as can also talk about a cause, similar to because that we had earlier on. Okay, so as I needed milk, I went to the shop. Okay, tells us the reason why we do something. Okay, so a few different words we can use there, and they all give us a different meaning. Okay, so it's talking about complex sentences, and now we move on to the last part of making our sentences more difficult, more varied, and that is by using relative clauses. Okay. So a relative clause is a clause which gives you more information about the noun that you have mentioned. Okay, but you don't start a new sentence, you include it in the same sentence. It basically gives you either a definition of the noun or extra information about that noun. Okay, so the relative clause always comes immediately after the noun that you have described. Okay? And they start with a relative pronoun. So this can be which or that, or who, or when, or where, etc. We'll see them on the next screen anyway. Okay, so you have your noun, and then you use one of those words, and then you give the description afterwards. So in the example, the App Store allowed users to personalize their phone with a wide range of applications, okay, which enhanced its versatility. Okay, so the which is giving us, so that part that begins with which gives us more information there. Okay, so it gives us more information about those applications that we're talking about. Okay, so these things are probably what you could probably know already, but it just helps to talk about them a little bit more. Okay, so if you use who, this talks about a person. So the programmer who developed the software is very talented. The who refers to the programmer. The programmer is a person. Okay, now the next one, whose describes the possession of a person. Okay, so the patient whose surgery was successful, so it is the surgery of the patient, is recovering very well. Okay. All right. So it can be for other possessions, like the woman whose bag was stolen. Okay. You're talking about the bag relating to the woman. Okay. Now, which can tell us about things and objects. So the computer, which I bought last year, is already outdated. Which is talking about the computer. Okay. Now that can tell us about people or things. Okay. So the project that we completed, it tells us about the project. If you're using it to talk about a person, you can say a plumber is a person that repairs your shower. So it can be used to describe people as well. And last of all, where tells us about places. So the office where the servers are, the place we are describing is the office. Okay. All right. So if you're giving some information that is not completely essential in the sentence, we put them between commas, and these are called non-defining relative clauses. Okay. So if we can remove the information and the sentence still makes sense, they are considered non-defining. That means we would need to put them in the commas that we've just looked at. All right, so we've just looked at some different ways of constructing some sentences. We looked at simple sentences, compound, complex, and relative sentences. Okay, so if you use all of those in your assignments, you will be doing very well, and that is going to help you get a good score in future. So this is the first of our writing sessions. So we're just going to finish up in a second. So please come back next Monday, and we will be having a look at our next session where we'll see what else we can look at with writing. So if you have any feedback on today's workshop, please scan the QR code and you can leave your opinion and impressions there. Okay. And if you do need any other help here from the English support tutors, please get in touch with either me or my colleague Christine by contacting us on this email address you can see here. So English support _manchesterwh@esl.ac.uk. And we can help you with any of those things that you can see on the screen there. So thank you very much for joining me today. And I look forward to seeing you again in future. Bye-bye.